She walked through the gates of the desert base with nothing but a duffel bag and a clearance badge clipped to her vest. Her name was written cleanly on the file. Anna Malik, age 32, interpreter, fluent in 5 languages. No military record. No next of kin, no online presence, just another civilian support hire contracted for 6 months. Nobody looked at her twice. They never did. She liked it that way. The sun was brutal and the wind kicked sand into every exposed inch of skin. But she kept walking eyes ahead, never blinking, never reacting. Her footsteps were silent despite the heavy boots, as if she had memorized exactly how to land each foot to make no noise. She passed the checkpoint without pause, showing her papers, her badge. Her empty palms, the guard glanced at her, then waved her through, already forgetting her face before she stepped away. Inside, the base life moved in a familiar rhythm. Drills, shouting engines, sparking tempers, cooling beer at night, laughter forced. Through the weight of sand and silence, the Marines and contractors lived like ghosts wrapped in duty, boredom and routine. Anna blended right in. She took her meals alone, spoke only when spoken to, carried notebooks that nobody ever saw her write. But someone did see her, and he did not forget. Chief Petty Officer Remy Dawson, a Navy SEAL with 14 years of dirt in his blood and instincts that never failed, had caught the tiniest detail during lunch. A gust of wind had blown her dark hair back just enough to reveal something behind her ear, a mark. Not even an inch-wide black ink, faded. But precise, it was not just a tattoo. It was a symbol. His fork froze mid-air as he stared. It was gone in half a second, covered again by her hair. But the image seared into his mind. He had seen that symbol once and only once on the inner wall of a compound, deep in the hills of Helmand Province. It had been scorched into stone beside a door that led to 30 dead bodies, none of them killed with. A gun. Dawson didn't say anything, didn't move, didn't even blink. But inside, his muscles tensed, his breathing slowed, and 1,000 questions lit up behind his eyes. Who was she? Why was she here? How had that symbol followed him across years and continents? That night he sat in the shadows of his barracks alone, staring at the ceiling with his boots still on, while the wind howled across the tents like whispers from a place he tried to forget. Anna Malik, interpreter, no combat training. No attachments, no digital footprint. How convenient, how perfect, how suspicious. He began watching her. Not following, just watching. Observing, noting patterns. Her schedule was too precise. Her body language too still. She reacted to noise, not with surprise, but calculation. She never turned her back near doorways, never sat with her back to the room. Her eyes scanned exits, more than faces. Something was wrong. 2 nights later, during a supply drop, he saw her again standing just behind the loading bay hands. Behind her back as the chopper dust blew around her, and for a split second the wind lifted her hair again. The mark was still there, a triangle with a single line through it. It was not decorative. It was not cultural. It was military. He checked the archives, asked quiet questions. Nothing official. Just chatter. Anna Malik was a ghost, and ghosts had reasons to hide. On the 3rd night, he saw her slip out of her tent after lights out, not sneaking, not rushing, just moving like she had every right. To be in the shadows, she moved across the compound as if her eyes saw in the dark, stopping only once near the edge of the old comms building. Then she disappeared into it, and did not emerge for 22 minutes when she did. She walked calmly, back to her tent, and crawled into her cot like nothing happened. But Dawson saw and Dawson remembered. The next morning, he looked into the comms logs, found nothing but static and silence. The base server showed no new entries, no transmissions, nothing. Had been accessed, except something had. He knew it because he trusted his instincts more than he trusted any machine, and his instincts were screaming that Anna Malik was not an interpreter, not a contractor, not anything close to what she claimed. Was something else, something dangerous, and she was not hiding by accident. She was hiding because someone had trained her to disappear. And now he was the only one who had seen her shadow, and he would not be the last. Anna knew the feeling of being watched. It moved along her spine like the edge of a cold blade, not sharp enough to pierce, but steady enough to paralyze. She had felt it before in places that never made the news, in missions that never had names. And now she felt it again as she crossed the mess hall, as she stepped into the motor pool, as she bent over to check the locks on a storage unit. Every movement carried a weight. Someone was watching her. And it was not just curiosity. It was suspicion. She kept her expression flat. Her posture relaxed, her routines unchanged. But her mind worked like a machine, calculating, measuring, adjusting. Her hands trembled once in the dead of night, but only once. And even then, she crushed the fear before it reached her heart. She had been hunted before, she had survived before, but this time something was different. This time she was not in control. The man watching her was good. Too good. His eyes never lingered long enough to be noticed, but she saw them in reflections. In windows, in the shimmer of a passing lens, she recognized the profile, broad shoulders, crew-cut, precise jaw, the mark of a career operator. He did not belong in a civilian base like this. Neither did she. She checked her room for bugs, for trackers, found nothing but silence and the ticking of a small analog watch hidden under her cot. The only thing she had kept from the old days. The second hand moved steady and slow, like her breathing. Dawson, meanwhile, kept gathering details. He timed her. Walks measured her reactions, noted her hand positions when speaking to officers. Always open, never clenched, never defensive. She moved like someone who had nothing to hide, but she moved too well. He had worked with agents, deep cover operatives, ghosts of war, and she moved like them. Calculated, efficient, lethal. He reached out to a contact in an old network, asked about the symbol, quietly off the record. Got a reply that simply read, "Forget you saw it." Followed by silence that meant more than words. Anna began shifting her movements slightly, altering her path through the base. She knew he was closing in, not physically, but mentally connecting dots he should never have seen. She needed an exit plan, but there was none, not without setting off alarms, not without burning everything she had rebuilt. One night, she walked to the old water tower just beyond the wire and stood there for an hour, staring out at the endless dunes. The wind tore at her jacket, and her thoughts began to drift to the last time she stood alone like this. The mission, the betrayal, the silence that followed. She had buried herself so deep. Even she forgot her own voice. Dawson followed but kept his distance, watching her from a ridge using optics. He barely breathed as she stood unmoving, a statue carved by secrets and war. He did not know who she was, not yet, but he was no longer curious. He was concerned. Something big was coming, and she was either the reason or the target. The next day, the base received word that a civilian security team would be arriving for a surprise systems check. Anna heard the transmission and went still, the kind of still that came before a storm. She walked straight to her tent, locked the flap, and pulled out the watch from beneath. Her cot opened the back with a tool fashioned from a toothbrush and took out a chip no larger than a grain of rice. Her hands moved with the speed of someone who had done this before. She inserted the chip into the comms panel behind her desk, bypassed the base firewalls, and sent a ping, just a single encrypted signal. It would not say her name or her location. It would only say one thing they found. The signal vanished into the noise. Hours later, the new team arrived. 5 men, clean-cut smiles. Too sharp to trust, they moved like veterans but acted like contractors. Anna watched them with calm eyes, but inside her mind she mapped their patterns, their gear, their choice of boots. All of it screamed covert, not private. She knew what they were, and she knew why they were here. They were not here to check systems. They were here to confirm her presence. She passed one of them in the hallway. He nodded. She returned it, then saw his eyes flicker toward her neck, toward the mark hidden beneath. Her collar, he had seen it. They all had. She walked away, slowly, never rushing, but her pulse began to climb. Not with fear, but with focus. She had hoped to disappear to live in the ashes of her past, but now her past had come to collect her, and she would have to decide soon whether to run again or finally make a stand in the shadows of the motor pool. Dawson watched the new arrivals with a cold knot forming in his gut. He saw the glances, the tension, the unspoken communication between men who had seen blood up close, and too often he knew killers when he saw them, and these men were not here for drills. They were here for her, and the question was no longer who she was, it was how many people were going to die because of it. The sun rose hard and fast, burning through the desert mist, as if the land itself was trying to erase all memory of the night before. But memory was not so easily burned, and neither were the things that followed her. The men from the security team moved through the base like they owned it. Polite too. Polite smiles, too clean eyes, too quiet. They wore contractor patches but carried themselves like wolves, and Anna knew wolves when she saw them. One of them had a scar above his brow, just like the one left on a lieutenant she once had to silence in a concrete room beneath a collapsed embassy. He had been sent to extract her, but changed the mission halfway through and sold her location for a bribe that never arrived. The scar was her. Reminder to him, a single warning that she was not someone who could be betrayed without consequence. And now this man walked the same dirt as her, pretending not to notice, pretending not to remember, but she saw the flicker in his step, the twitch. In his fingers he knew he remembered. She sat in the comms room, staring at the same blank screen that had haunted her for years. And in that silence her thoughts drifted back to the mission, the one they buried, the one that broke her unit they were. Called Spectre 6, not officially, not on paper, but among the few who whispered about them, that was the name a unit so deep. Even the agency denied it existed, trained for disappearances, infiltration, destabilization, assassinations, cleanup when nations made mistakes too messy to fix with diplomacy, and too dangerous to leave behind. Her team had been sent to recover stolen data from a rogue lab in the mountains of southern Tajikistan. What they found instead was a facility full of dead scientists, and one broken case that once held a bioweapon never tested, never declared, never meant to be found. When they called it in, the order came not to extract, but to detain the team. One by one they were hunted down by their own people until only she remained. They thought she died in the final fire, but fire was something she had learned to walk through. Now that same fire returned in the shape of the scarred man and his team, who spoke softly but listened too closely. They visited the towers, the comms, the munitions dumps. They asked for access logs and protocols. They said it was standard procedure, but it was not standard for two of them to carry concealed sidearms with the safeties taped. It was not standard to study her tent from a distance, at night, while pretending to smoke. She sat with Dawson on a rusted metal bench behind the motor shed, silent for a long while until he finally spoke without turning to her. He said, "That mark behind your ear, where did you get it?" She did not lie. She said it was earned, not given. And if he knew what it meant, then he also knew asking further was dangerous for both of them. He told her about the compound in Helmand, about the symbol carved into the stone, about the 30 bodies and the silence that followed. He said he never told command what he saw, only kept the image in his head, waiting for it to mean something someday, and now it meant her. She turned her eyes toward the horizon and said, "They were here to clean the past," and that made him pause. He asked her what they had to clean, and her answer was simple: everything. That night, the scarred man entered the old surveillance building and stayed for 2 hours alone. The base logs would later show the footage was overwritten during a software patch. Anna was nearby, watching from the shadows, and when he exited, she followed him to the abandoned training yard, where he met with another figure, unmarked, face covered. But she saw the hand signs. They used the same ones she had once used to move silently through enemy territory. It was the same language, the same bloodline. And she knew now this was not an audit. This was a hunt. She slipped away without being seen, returned to her tent and retrieved the small silver blade hidden Inside the seam of her bag, the blade was old, scratched, but balanced and more familiar to her than her own reflection elsewhere. Dawson began checking the background of the contractors and found something that made his stomach tighten. One of them had been listed as killed in action 3 years ago. Another had no record at all. The rest were ghosts, just like her. The pieces were forming a picture, and the picture was soaked in the kind of blood that never washed off. At midnight, the base lights flickered, then went dark for 7 full seconds. A pause just long enough for silence to take over, just long enough for something to move without being seen. And when the power returned, one of the guards at the west gate was gone, vanished without. A sound, no blood, no footprints, just absence, and Anna knew this was the beginning, not of the end, but of the reckoning. Dawson had spent years walking into places no sane man would go, crawling through jungle-rot desert heat, frozen hills of countries whose names were only whispered in the silence of black briefings. But none of it felt like this. None of it burned. Like this, not even the night he watched his best friend bleed out with a grin on his face, telling Dawson to finish the mission. Not even the time he buried intel inside a child's broken toy to avoid capture, and now standing outside Anna's tent in the dead of night, with the air thick and wrong, he felt something worse than war. He felt truth. He pushed open the flap quietly, no weapon in hand, just his eyes sharp and unflinching and his voice low. He said, "We need to talk." Anna stood beside, her cot not surprised, not afraid, not even curious. She had expected him days ago, maybe hours ago. She did not move. Her hands stayed at her sides. She said, "You should walk away, Chief. You are good, but not good enough to survive what you are stepping into." He took a step forward, ignoring the warning, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of what he knew was coming. He said, "I saw the symbol. I know where I saw it. I know what that makes you." She nodded slowly, her face unreadable, the room silent. Except for the hum of the small generator outside, she said, "Then you know why I disappeared," he said. "I know enough to realize you are not who you claim to be, and I know enough to feel it in my gut that those new contractors are not who they say they are either, and I know enough to trust my instincts when they tell me they did not come to audit the base. They came for you." She took a breath, not a sigh, but the kind of breath taken before a blade is drawn. She said, "My name is not Anna Malik, it never was." Didn't blink, didn't speak, just waited. She said, "I was born in Istanbul, raised in London, recruited out of university, disappeared at 26, joined a team that never had a flag, operated for 5 years on missions. That never happened until one day a mission went wrong and someone decided we were easier to erase than to explain, and so they burned us all," Dawson said. "But you lived," she said barely and only, "because I broke every rule they taught us. I ran, I hid. I changed faces, names, stories, countries every 2 years. I became someone else, and now someone finally connected the dots, or someone finally wants the last ghost silence." He stared at her, then asked, "Why are they doing it now after all this time?" She said, "Because something is coming. Something buried with the bodies. Something they thought was lost is back. And if I am still breathing, then it means they failed to keep it dead." She walked to the desk, pulled out a folded map, opened it with hands that did not tremble, and pointed to a spot in northern Afghanistan. She said that is where it started, and that is where they will go next, if they have not already. He looked at the map, then at her, then asked, "So what are you going to do?" Her eyes, finally, shifted, and for the first time he saw something that frightened him more than the blood and sand of his past. He saw resolves. She said, "I am going to finish it." He stepped back just once, then said, "You can't do it alone." She said, "I always did." He said, "Not this time." Outside, the wind picked up as if the desert had sensed the shift in the air. The base was quiet, too quiet, and somewhere far off a dog barked, then went silent. He turned to leave the tent, then paused and said, You have maybe a day before. They act maybe less I can help. But if you lie to me again or use me as cover, I will bury this myself and leave you to burn," she said. "I understand." He left her standing there alone, and she stood without moving until the shadows shifted and the moonlight touched her face. And in her eyes there was nothing soft, nothing kind, nothing left of the girl who once walked through a quiet campus dreaming of diplomacy. There was only the warrior who had crawled through betrayal and fire and learned how to survive with nothing but silence. That night neither of them slept, and at sunrise the man with the scar met privately with two others and gave them a signal. It was time. The man with the scar moved like a ghost through the early morning haze. His boots left no sound on the sand, his eyes cold as polished steel. He had been waiting for this moment for nearly 6 years, waiting to finish what was started in Tajikistan, waiting to erase the last thread that could unravel everything they buried. He had read her file, he had studied her movements, but he had never seen her face until 3 days ago when she looked right through him, and for one awful second he felt something he had not felt since his first kill failure. Inside the operations tent, the contractors had locked down the internal network under the pretense of a diagnostic test. They said a patch needed to be installed and the systems needed to be isolated. No one questioned it. The base commander signed off without reading the fine print, and just like that, the base was blind. Anna sat alone in the corner of the mess hall, her fork untouched, her coffee cooling by the second, her eyes fixed on the open doorway. She could feel the walls shifting around her, the trap tightening. It was too early, they were moving too soon. Someone above them must have gotten nervous and pushed the timeline forward. That meant mistakes, and mistakes could be used. She stood up quietly, left the tray behind, and walked into the sun. Her path unhurried, her steps soft. She headed for the maintenance bay where Dawson waited, leaning against a rusted Humvee, chewing on a piece of dried jerky, like he had not just decided to betray every order and protocol he had ever followed. He said they isolated the network and pulled internal comms offline. "I tapped into the backup line and sent out a ping to a secure channel. Let's see who's still listening," Anna said. "If anyone answers, tell them not to come. Tell them to stay buried." He raised a brow and said, "You think they're burning everything?" She nodded slowly, her face like stone. "If they pulled the trigger on this operation, then they're not just after me. They're cleaning house top to bottom, and anyone who touches this will vanish," he said. "I've vanished before," she said. "Not like this," he said. "Then we vanished together." She didn't answer, but something in her eyes flickered. Not trust, not yet, but something close to understanding. He handed her a flash drive and said, "I pulled what I could before they shut the servers down. Internal logs, base security patterns, drone path data. If they make a move, we'll see it coming." She pocketed the drive and said, "They won't see them coming. They're not amateurs. They won't strike loud. They'll make it look like an accident," I said. "Then we make it look like we don't see them." She turned toward the gate and said, "When it starts, it'll start fast. They won't leave time for questions." Hours passed with the sun burning down and the silence stretching like a wire waiting to snap. Then just before dusk, the first body was found. A technician face down behind the generator, throat cut, no witnesses, no alarms. Just red on the dirt, and the lie that he slipped on. A Tulana stood over the body with Dawson beside her and said, "They're testing the perimeter, seeing how close they can get before anyone notices. This was not a kill. This was a message. That night." She sat in her tent cross-legged on the floor, a small mirror in front of her, a blade in her hand. She reached up and cut the hair above her neck, exposing the mark that had haunted her across every border and back. She stared at it in the mirror, not with fear, but with purpose. She took out the old watch again, opened the back, and inserted the chip. Dawson gave her. It lit up for 3 seconds, then went dark far away in a cold room buried beneath an unmarked building. A screen came to life, and a single word blinked across the blackacho. The man who read it had no name, only a number, and when he saw the word, he stood up, walked down a hall, and gave a single order. "Reactivate Spectre back at the base." The contractors moved in formation. Now, no more smiles, no more small talk. They watched everything. They watched Dawson. They watched Anna. They watched the gates, the towers, the sky, and the shadows. Anna opened a pouch and removed a patch with the same symbol carved behind her ear. She pressed it to her sleeve where it once belonged. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to speak a Name Lara, her real name, the one they erased, the one they feared, and now she was taking it back. The night fell heavy, like a curtain drawn by unseen hands, and the base lights flickered, once then held steady, but everyone who knew anything understood. The flicker was no glitch. It was a signal, a warning, a breath before the plunge. Anna now, Ilara, stood on the edge of the empty airstrip, her eyes scanning the darkness. Not for movement, but for silence. Because that was how ghosts moved. Not with sound, but with absence. Dawson approached from the shadows holding a folder that should not exist. Something he pulled from the secure vault before the lockdown, and now he held it like a live grenade. He handed it to her and said, "This is what they're trying to erase." She opened the folder, and inside were photos, maps, handwritten notes, old mission, reports all stamped with the same phrase Spectre 6 redacted. She flipped through pages until she saw it. The image of the lab in Tajikistan, the broken case, the biometric log showing access from someone high in the chain, someone she had once called commanders. He said they were never trying to contain the bioweapon. They were moving it, and we walked in before the handoff. Dawson nodded. They didn't burn your team because you failed. They burned you because you saw what wasn't meant to be seen. Ilara closed the folder, and her voice came like steel sharpened in flame. Then they're not coming to kill me, they're coming to bury the truth. He said the truth is already buried. She said not if I dig it up with their bones. Just then the base alarm screamed once short and sharp, followed by silence, and then all the lights cut out again. This time, they did not come back. The hum of power died. The backup generator failed. The comms went dead, and the air shifted into something colder. Dawson drew. His sidearm, Ilara, already had the blade in her palm. They moved together without speaking, heading for the surveillance building where the backup systems were housed. But halfway there, a shadow stepped into their path, a man in contractor gear, but no name tag, no unit patch, just a rifle and dead eyes. He raised his weapon, but he was not fast enough. Ilara moved like memory, like instinct, like the echo of violence long buried and never forgotten. She drove her blade under his arm into the gap. Between vest and ribs, twisted once and dropped him without a sound. Dawson caught the weapon before it hit the ground, and they kept moving. Inside the surveillance building, they found the server's fried wires melted, glass shattered someone had planted. An EMP device, small, controlled, precise. This wasn't chaos. It was precision. Ilara said, "They want no evidence, no recordings, no witnesses." Dawson said, "Then we give them what they don't expect." They turned and found 3 more men entering from the side door, weapons, raised flashlights cutting through the smoke. But Ilara was already in motion. She threw a metal shard into the nearest light, and the room fell into blackness again. Then she moved with the shadows, and the screams were short and final. When the lights came back, Dawson stood alone, breathing heavy, 3 bodies at his feet, and Ilara crouched over a console, pulling the hard drive from the fried server. It was mostly gone, but maybe not all. Maybe enough. They moved through the back halls of the base, past bunkers and storage sheds, past the empty medic bay where 2 more bodies lay, one with a knife in his back, the other with a look of surprise frozen on his face. Dawson said, "They're sweeping in 3s, fast, quiet, brutal." Ilara said, "They think I'm cornered." He said, "Are you?" She looked at him and said, "Not yet." They reached the motor pool, and she opened a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, pulled out a case marked tools. Inside was not tools. Inside was a small sat phone, a burner drive, 2 passports, and a silenced pistol. She handed the phone to Dawson and said, "If I don't make it out, call the number marked E-code, the message Phantom Live." She said not if, but when. She didn't argue. As they exited the motor pool, a voice crackled over a private frequency, the voice of the man with the scar. He said, "Elara, you were supposed to die years ago. You were supposed to stay gone. You should have stayed gone." She stopped walking and said, "You should have finished the job yourself." He said, "I'm here now," she said. "Then come and bleed." Dawson looked at her and saw not a runaway, not a ghost, not even a soldier. He saw something more dangerous. He saw a reckoning wrapped in skin, and the night was just beginning. The silence before the first bullet was not silence at all. It was breath held. It was death leaning close. It was the pause of a predator before the strike, and Elara knew that rhythm better than anyone. She stood on the rooftop of the admin building, eyes fixed on the far gate where three figures moved like shadows, too slow, too careful, too late. She had already mapped their angles, already calculated the wind, already prepared the answer, with one squeeze of the trigger. The first dropped, and before the other two could react, the second crumpled. The third ran, but she had already adjusted the scope, and he fell without a scream, just a thud that told her the math was still perfect. Below, Dawson watched with a grim nod, then whispered into the shortwave, "Clear for now, moving west." She responded with two words, "Not yet." Then she was gone from the roof and into the stairwell blade. Ready, breath steady as years of buried reflexes returned with terrifying grace. She moved without hesitation through corridors, thick with smoke and betrayal, each step bringing her closer to the center where the man with the scar waited. Not behind orders, not behind masks, but in the open. He wanted her to come, and she would, because there was fire in her name, and it was no longer silent inside the old rec hall. They had turned it into a command post. Maps lined the walls. Wires ran like veins across the floor. Drones blinked quietly on their pads, and in the center stood the man she once called brother. Not by blood, but by war. He had been part of Spectre once before he traded the mission for money, before he sold names, before he watched the others die and said nothing. He smiled as she stepped in, said, "I knew you couldn't resist." She said, "You always were good at baiting traps," he said. "And you always were too proud to run." She said, "I did run, and now I'm done." Then she threw the first knife, not at him, but at the drone panel. Sparks flew, lights died. He dove to the side, drew his weapon, but she was already moving, already close, already inside his range. They clashed in the center like two storms colliding blade to fist, strike to counter blood. To blood, Dawson arrived seconds later, saw two other contractors moving in, and engaged without hesitation. One shot, two shots. Then he was down behind a desk, reloading, moving like the seasoned warrior. He was, Elara and the scarred man fought without words, just breath and fury. He was strong, but she was faster. And when he finally landed a blow, she rolled with it. Came up with her blade slicing upward and left a line across his chest that made him snarl. He said, "I should have killed you in Tajikistan." She said, "You did. You just didn't bury the right pieces." They locked again, and this time she found his rhythm, found the old habit in his stance, the way he dropped his left elbow when tired, and she used it. Ducked low, came up under his arm, and drove the blade into his ribs. Then twisted, he gasped. Eyes wide, said it was never personal. She said it always is, and let him fall. Dawson moved to her side gun, still hot hands, steady eyes scanning. He said more. Coming. Maybe 2, maybe 5. Maybe the rest. She said, let them. They retreated to the northern bunker, dragging the body with them. Not for revenge, but for proof. Because what they had now was leverage. And in a world of shadows, leverage was currency. Inside the bunker, they uploaded. The fragments of the recovered drive connected it to the sat phone and sent out the message code Phantom Lives 3 minutes later. They received an automated response, received and acknowledged. That meant someone was still out there. Someone still remembered Spectre 6. Someone willing to burn back outside the perimeter lit up with headlights. Drones buzzed in low formation gunfire. Cracked across the field as more contractors tried to push in. But they didn't know this base, like Elara did. They didn't know the back tunnels, the blind corners, the broken fences. They didn't know that she had been watching all week setting. traps, timing movements preparing, and when the fuel depot exploded behind them, it wasn't an accident, it was a declaration. Dawson covered her flank as she moved through the smoke like a wraith taking targets one by one. No wasted movement, no missed. Shot each breath, precise each motion final. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. They were hunted but not broken. And by dawn the field was silent again, except for the fire still burning where the command truck used to be. The smoke had not cleared, but the gunfire had stopped. Bodies scattered across the north side of the base. The flames crackling like whispers of ghosts passed, and Alara stood in the center of it all, her face lit by the low burn, her breath steady, her blades stained but still gripped tight. She had not spoken in minutes, had not blinked since the last man fell because she knew this was not over. Not even close, Dawson crouched beside the shattered console of the command truck sorting through. What was left of the transmissions, burnt paper, corrupted drives, broken comms, and a small chip half melted, but maybe still alive. He held it up and said, "This might be it. This might be the thread they missed." Elira nodded, but her eyes were on the horizon, because she felt it in her bones in the air. In the silence, something was coming, something old, something familiar. He said, "Backup's not coming, is it?" He said, "It was never backup." He said, "Then who answered the calls?" She said, "Not who. What and—" Before he could ask, she was already walking to the old radio tower that had been dead for years, but still held a secret known only to those who lived in the shadows beneath governments and orders and flags that changed with every lee beneath the tower was a hatch, and beneath the hatch was a stairwell, and at the bottom was a door she had not opened in 7 years. She entered the code, not with hesitation, but with purpose, and when it opened, the lights came on one by one, revealing a small room, cold and untouched. A voice spoke from the dark-filtered synthetic flat echo, confirmed identity. She said Spectre 6. The voice replied, "Verification complete, upload in progress." Dawson stepped beside her holding the chip and said, "You think this thing will even boot?" She said, "It has to." He plugged it in and the screen filled with static, then lines, then images, mission logs, black site locations, payment trails, and finally a name, General Leland Cormack, a man who had never been connected to any operation, yet whose signature was buried deep in the digital bones of the Spectre Initiative. Dawson said, "That's the man behind the curtain." Alara said, "And now we rip the curtain down." Just then, the power flickered. The room shook. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the voice said, "Hostile breach detected 6 minutes until suppression." Alara looked at Dawson and said they found the tower. He said 6 minutes is enough. They grabbed the drives and moved fast up the stairs into the open air where the dust was thicker than before, and the whine of drones filled the air low and angry like hornets ready to strike, and in the distance black SUVs kicked up desert sand as they closed. Alara said, "They want the files. They don't want survivors." Dawson said, "Let's make them regret that they split without words." She took the north path. He circled east. They moved like water slipping through the cracks of a machine too slow to adapt, setting charges in places only they remembered, blowing out the roads, collapsing tunnels, flooding the old storage pits with fuel and wire, and when the first drone fired, it hit a decoy, not a person, and when the first squad entered the motor pool, they found only fire in the chaos. Alara moved to the comms shack, where she linked the recovered files to a high-gain satellite and uploaded everything to an old dead drop used only in emergencies and only by ghosts. And somewhere far away, the ones who remembered began to stir. A man in Norway opened an old locker and pulled out a badge that hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. A woman in Chile burned a fake passport and boarded a plane with nothing but a name. A hacker in Seoul cracked the encryption before it was even finished uploading and knew the war was about to return. The file titled Phoenix Protocol was no longer hidden. Back at the base, Alara and Dawson regrouped in the wreckage of the drone hangar, crouched, low heartbeat steady, and watched as the last SUV burned as the last drone fell from the sky, sparking into silence. Dawson said that was too close. Alara said it was just the first wave. He said, then what now? She looked at the horizon again, not with fear but with memory, and said, now we find the others. Now we bring the truth into the light. Now we remind them that ghosts don't fade. They rise in the distance. A chopper approached, black. Fast, silent, its emblem scratched off, but its door open ready. Alara turned to Dawson and said, you coming? He said, always. They boarded without hesitation, without doubt, and as the chopper lifted into the rising sun, the base behind them crumbled into smoke and silence, and far above the world began to shift. The chopper cut through the clouds like a blade, the wind screaming across the open doors, the sun barely breaking through the gray, and Alara sat near the rear, watching the ground fall away, watching the past sink beneath her boots. She did not speak, did not blink, did not move as the pilot gave coordinates in short clipped tones. Not military, not private, something older, something forgotten. Dawson sat beside her, staring at the tablet in his lap. The files they pulled from the bunker were decrypted, now laid bare in front of them, and what they showed was not just corruption, it was architecture, an entire machine built beneath the surface, hidden from oversight, designed to erase anyone who saw too much. He said, this is bigger than Spectre. This is bigger than Tajikistan. She said, it always was. He tapped the screen, pointed to a file labeled Dead File. 62 said this name appear in any of your records. She leaned in, stared at the screen, and the breath in her throat caught not from fear, but from recognition. The name was hers. Not Anna, not Alara, a different one. A name they gave her when she was 15, a name that should not exist. She said, how did they find that? Dawson said, I think you were never a leak. I think you were the blueprint. The chopper shifted, suddenly dipped, then leveled. The pilot spoke over comms. We got company birds incoming 3 clicks southeast, heavy tailing. No-eyed Alara stood fast, looked out the side, saw them 3 black tilt-rotors, no markings, no lights coming. In fast? She said, evasive pattern. Keep low-terrain shield. But the birds were already firing tracer rounds, lit the sky. Bullets raked the edge of the rotor, sparks flew, and the chopper spun. But the pilot held firm, dipped hard between 2 rising hills, and banked left, disappearing into fog inside. Alara and Dawson moved to the rear, checked weapons, secured packs. Dawson said, we bail or we burn. Alara nodded. Said, drop in 60 seconds, prep fast, go low, go dark. The pilot shouted over his shoulder. You got 30 seconds to live unless you jump now. They didn't argue, didn't wait. They leapt into the wind, free fall into silence, into cold, then snapped chutes and landed rough among rocks, and Alara rolled twice, came up blade drawn, pistol ready, eyes scanning. Then Dawson landed beside her, hard, coughing, but alive. They ditched their chutes, moved north toward the extraction point, but the birds circled back now on foot teams, sweeping thermal drones, scanning every breath and the mountain air. Gave no cover. They ran for hours, ducking under trees, slipping into caves, weaving through ravines, but the hunters were close, too close, and finally at the top of a ridge, Alara stopped. Turned, looked at Dawson and said, we're not running. We're leading, he said. Into what? She smiled, said, into the end. They doubled back fast, laid false trails, planted noise traps, triggered old comm signals from decoy devices, and by the time the lead team caught up, they were chasing ghosts across a frozen hell. Alara found the uplink buried under an avalanche beacon, still pulsing, shielded by 6 feet of snow and rock. She cracked it open, plugged in the drive, and hit. Send the signal shot out, encrypted, layered, masked by hundreds of false IPs, and bounced across continents. And when it landed, it hit every node they still had active, every buried contact, every forgotten ghost. Every sleeping name. Dawson watched the light blink green and said, it's out. She said, now it begins. Behind them, the sky lit up the tilt-rotors. Launched flares, dropped charges, and the whole ridge exploded in a wall of fire and snow. They dove into a crevice as the blast shook the world around them, buried them half alive and clawing through ash and ice and memory when they emerged hours later. bloodied, breathless, and burning. They were met not by enemies, but by silence. And in the silence came a voice. Calm old familiar Recco confirmed. They turned to see three figures in cold weather gear, no insignia, no names. One of them handed Alara. A device said, "The dead file triggered a cascade." "The network is waking up." Alara took the device. Her hands steady, her eyes locked on the data streaming across the screen. Names, places, hidden vaults, old debts, resurfaced, truths long denied, Dawson said. "They can't stop this now." Alara said they're going to try, and the man in the gear said let them. They moved as one into the mist, down the trail, into the forgotten paths of war and secrets where legends lived and where ghosts finally rose. The snow fell harder as they moved deeper into the forest. The branches overhead groaned beneath the weight of silence and time, and Alara kept walking without pause, without looking back, because she knew there was no going back. Not after what they had unleashed, not after the dead file had burned its way through every encrypted node, every shadow network, every system that once tried to bury her beside her. Dawson limped but never complained. His side was bruised, his shoulder torn, but his eyes burned the same way hers did, with purpose, with clarity, with a fire that could not be bought, could not be silenced. The three ghosts who had found them walked ahead, leading them through switchbacks and ravines, old trails used in wars never acknowledged, and buried missions that never officially existed. They said little but moved with the precision of people who had been hunted and survived. People like Herbie Nightfall. They reached an old bunker carved into the side of a cliff, masked by time and snow and myth. The door creaked open with a code that had not been used in years, and inside the air was dry, cold, thick with dust and memory. Alara stepped inside and felt it all rush back. The drills, the missions, the names, the ones who never came. Back, and the ones who did but never fully. The walls were still lined with maps. The center table still held faded files, redacted lines, and burned corners, and in the far end, a terminal still pulsing, faintly waiting. The oldest of the three ghosts stepped forward, said, "You were never meant to be forgotten." She said, "I never forgot them." He nodded, then handed her a small drive, said, "This is everything. Everything they tried to erase, everyone. They tried to break." She plugged it into the terminal and the screen lit up with faces, names, operations that had been buried under concrete and classified lies, and at the center of it all was a single connection. A man who had never been in any official report, and yet whose fingerprints were on every file, every betrayal, every name lost. General Leland Cormac Dawson leaned in, said, "He's not just behind it, he is. He built it." Alara said, "Then we tear it down." The data was too big, too dangerous to move through normal lines, but they had prepared. For this, over the last week, the reactivated nodes, the awakened ghosts. The loyal few who had never stopped watching were already in place. The network was awake and hungry. Alara initiated the cascade one file at a time, sending it to whistleblowers, to journalists, to international courts, to allies in exile, and to enemies who would enjoy the fire. And as the data bled into the world, the silence cracked. The lies peeled away, and the world began to see Cormac was in a private compound in the desert, surrounded by men who owed him everything and feared him more than death. And when the first headlines hit, when the first footage leaked, when the first survivor gave their name on camera, his compound went dark. His men turned inward, and the fortress became a Trapalara. And Dawson were already en route, not to kill, not for revenge, but for a reckoning. They reached the compound by night, dressed in silence and shadow, slipped through the gaps in security that only insiders could know. Bypassed walls and codes and guards who no longer believed, and when they reached the inner sanctum, he was there, waiting, old cold, unmoved. He said, "I suppose you came for justice." Alara said no. He said then what she said, the truth. She placed the drive On his desk pressed play and let him hear every scream, every lie, every death he ordered, then let him watch as his empire collapsed in real time. Bank accounts, frozen allies, arrested assets, seized the machine he built, turned to ash. He stood slowly. "Said you were never meant to survive?" she said. "And you were never meant to forget or reached for a weapon." She was faster. The room cracked with one shot, then silence. She didn't check the body, didn't need to. Outside the compound burned as others. Took what remained of his files and his legacy and scattered it into the winds. Dawson said it's over. She said it's beginning. They walked into the dawn side by side, the sky turning gold above them, and for the first time in years the weight on. Her shoulders began to lift, because she was not just another face. She was the face they would remember, the one who survived, the one who fought back, the one who reminded the world what happens when a ghost decides to rise. And this time, she was never disappearing again.